bumping that. Welcome. One sec. Hello. Welcome, one and all, to today's event on sea level rise, brought to you by UN Global Pulse and the University of New South Wales. To quote the Secretary General, rising sea levels are a worldwide catastrophe which uniquely threaten Pacific Islands. This panel is about that potentially existential threat, as well as some of the data-driven ways that the UN, member states, academics, and others are almost literally rising to the occasion. My name is Latif Nasser. I'm a science journalist, host of the podcast Radio Lab, and your moderator for this session. We have many key stakeholders on this issue of sea level rise right here in the room with us today. We have senior representatives of governments of Indonesia, Fiji, and Australia. We have key members of the UN family, as well as academics, in particular from the University of New South Wales. There was one key stakeholder, however, who refused our invitation, the ocean. We invited the ocean. They just waved us off. We're very salty about it. Okay, so that's the only joke I'm going to make this whole hour because it is such a packed hour and I don't want to waste any precious time. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the entire session, so if you do have questions along the way, please write them down and hopefully we'll get to them. Now, to kick us off, we are honored to have UN Undersecretary General Jorge Moreira de Silva. He has been the executive director of UNOPS since April 2023. He has over 20 years experience working on climate change, energy, and environment in the public and development sectors. Previously, he was the director of the Developmental Cooperation Directorate at OECD and Portugal's Minister for the Environment, Territorial Planning, and Energy. Please welcome Mr. Moreira de Silva.
Thank you, Latif. It's a pleasure to be with you and all the colleagues, Excellencies, colleagues. The most interesting part of the session will be after my opening remarks. It will be through the panel, but still I'd like to share some remarks in this important moment where the Secretary General is saying that we have to choose between a breakdown and a breakthrough. And this is exactly the topic on the sea rise level. Last month's UN's report on surging seas presented us with an alarming picture. Since the start of the 20th century, global mean sea level has risen faster than over any period of time before, at least in the last 3,000 years. And the rate of increase is accelerating. You read the report, it's pretty alarming, but unfortunately for those that have been following climate change, we knew that the trend was quite robust. And in the Asia-Pacific region, home to 60% of the world's population, is particularly prone to the impacts of the sea level rise. Given the region's extensive coastlines, low-lying territories, and many small island states. Addressing this existential threat of the sea level rise to these communities requires collective and urgent action across mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage efforts. Because as you know, even after we reach net zero, the sea level rise will continue due to the impact of the past decades. Today's event is an opportunity to ask how we can help mobilize climate action and the financing needed to build resilience in coastal communities. To succeed, approaches need to be driven by robust data, as Latif was mentioning, and based around the needs, views, and ownership of the local community. Having the right implementation capacity to bring these aspects together, it's crucial. UNOPS, as an agency focused on implementation and on operations, we stand by countries in the Asia-Pacific region in your efforts to respond to these challenges. We are committed to providing practical solutions to help countries combat climate change and build resilience. Through our expertise on procurement, infrastructure, and project management. Allow me to share some examples. In Kiribati, we are working with the government of Australia to deliver inclusive and nature-based sustainable coastal protection. The project will implement both resilient infrastructure and nature-based solutions and create a model for long-term climate adaptation. It's developed in close consultation with the community, together with our civil society and government partners. Another example, in northwestern Sri Lanka, with the support of the EU, UNOPS has helped communities in low-lying coastal areas to increase their resilience to floods and storm water by integrated, again, nature-based solutions with sustainable drainage systems for flood protection. We also administer the Rising Nations Initiative, a member states-led initiative that supports the Tuvalu and Pacific Atoll countries' efforts to preserve their sovereignty, protect their statehood, and safeguard the rights and heritage of affected populations at the front line of climate crisis. And together with UNDRR, we host the Santiago Network on Loss and Damage, which helps countries hardest hit by the climate emergency to access the technical assistance they need to foster resilience, build capacity, and manage loss and damage. Through the so-called ICAT, the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, which we also host, we have established a practical tool for assessing loss and damage and supported its application for early warning, monitoring, and evaluation frameworks to manage disaster risks from slow onset events such as sea level rise. And finally, and I should have started with that, we are very proud to support the UN Global Pulse, the Sec General's Innovation Lab, which supports responsible and inclusive innovation across the UN system and is serving, as you know very well, through this event as well, as a platform for multi-stakeholder partnerships, including in the Asia-Pacific region. And we are very proud and honored for supporting this initiative, the Global Pulse. To secure a climate-resilient future in the face of the rising sea levels, we need practical solutions. Scaled-up finance is a key part of the way forward, as is policy and the creation of the enabling environment. But let's make no mistake, policy and financing being a sine qua non condition, it doesn't respond to all needs. There are some elements associated with the implementation gap that needs to be addressed. And this is where technical assistance must play a fundamental role. In most international discussions, we tend to focus on policy on financing. Allow me, being an agency that is focused on operation, to make the call for also a focus on implementation, on the need to provide additional capacity through technical assistance. UNOPS, as I mentioned, we stand ready to support all of you in this process, a data-driven, evidence-driven process, bridging the implementation gap, always working in partnerships, always ready to bring our operational focus to respond to needs in the pursuit of a sustainable, resilient, and prosperous future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jorge. Clear picture of the severity of the problem and kind of a sense of, what we need to do about it. So now that the table is set, let's hear directly from the member states who are not only some of the most directly affected nations, but also in a way some of the first responders. They've kindly agreed to give us a snapshot of the problem, how much damage it has caused, what they're doing about it, and what they think the international community ought to be doing about it. So please let's welcome our first panel to the stage. We'll start with His Excellency Tri Taryat, Deputy Minister for Multilateral Cooperation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. Welcome. Next, we have Her Excellency Senivasa Wanggaramasi, Deputy Secretary of Climate Change in Fiji. Welcome. as well as Her Excellency Rebecca Bryant, Australia's Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations. Welcome. Thanks for coming. And finally, Ayaka Suzuki, Director of the Strategic Planning and Monitoring Unit at the UN Executive Office of the Secretary General. Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's start with Indonesia. As a nation of 17,500 islands and nearly 280 million people, not to mention one of the top 20 global economies, you are the largest archipelagic nation in the world. And fittingly, you all hosted the Archipelagic and Island States Forum. I have a two-part question for you, Your Excellency. First, can you tell us about the state of sea level rise in your country and what impact it is having? And second, can you tell us not only about the ways you are adapting, but also the ways you are supporting your neighbors?
Well, thank you, Latif. A very good afternoon. I'll start with, I think Latif already mentioned on how unique Indonesia is. And you are very right that millions of Indonesians living in the low-lying coastal areas, where their homes and livelihoods are increasingly vulnerable to flooding, erosion, and extreme weather events. So we have to respond to it, and we have to work together. On that note, we offer, and I'm willing to share 3 ideas with our friends in the room. First, on the adaptation and mitigation efforts, we must invest in community, resilient infrastructure, and restore our natural defenses against climate change. We proudly enhance community participation through adaptation and mitigation program, but in what we call PROCLIM or Program ICLIM or climate programs in coastal and rural areas that is recognized as a role model for community-based climate resilience. We have also proudly intensified large-scale mangrove restoration, which have historically protected our coastlines, and certainly in keeping with the Paris Agreement goals to limit the global temperature, we have committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and transitioning to a low-carbon economy. So second, on legal and diplomatic tools, we believe that, once again, UNCLOS provides a solid foundation that maritime borders remain unshaken, and we are very much committed to working with our neighbors and the international community to ensure the principles of equity, fairness, and respect to international law continue to guide our actions. The third one, I think Latif mentioned, and it's very important, how we work in the context of international and multi-stakeholders cooperation. Just yesterday, Indonesia, Fiji, and Maldives proudly co-hosted the regional dialogue on ocean-based climate actions in Bangkok under the framework of UNESCAP that has provided a very strong foundation for regional collective actions to encourage capacity building, technical assistance, and international cooperative measures. In addition, Latif already mentioned also on our initiative on the Archipelagic and Island States Forum, during which we have been working very closely with UNDP as our interim secretariat. And prior to it, we also initiated the Coral Triangle initiatives with other neighboring countries. And just recently, we have also concluded our projects on climate and water-related activities under the framework of our presidency in the 10th World Water Forum. Turning to your second question, I think the sea level rise is a global problem that requires a global response. We all agree to that. So our meeting today, I think we should forge stronger global commitments, not only here, but also in the bigger room. And I think during these days, we have to continue voicing these very pressing issues. And we need to collaborate in facing the challenges and ensuring that the provision of wider access of financing, including loss and damage fund for countries vulnerable to the impacts of sea level. So to conclude, let me take this opportunity also to thank UN Global Pulse in the development of an analytical tool to forecast the potential impact of rising sea level and the required targeted interventions, as well as our cooperation and partnership that have been done in Indonesia and for the future activities. Thank you, Latif.
Thank you so much. Sure. Thank you so much for all those specifics. Let's move on to Fiji, if we can. Like Indonesia, you are a global leader in addressing this topic, punching above your weight, so to speak, including as the first Pacific Island nation to chair COP23 and as a leading voice in the Pacific Islands Forum. How would you describe the impact of rising sea levels, including and especially how it affects food and water for your people?
Thank you, Latif. Kind greetings, tropical warm greetings from my island in Fiji. And first of all, just acknowledging and appreciating the invite from the UN Global Pulse and UNSW. For Fiji, ladies and gentlemen, the impacts of climate change, natural disasters, sea level rise, and storm surges is evidently felt and witnessed in my country. It's a common phenomenon that wreaks nationwide havoc, but the harsh reality of the occurrence of the climate change impact and sea level rise is right at our doorstep of our island homes. So as part of the small island development states, we are equally vulnerable to the increasing threats of both climate change and sea level rise. And because of its the level of vulnerability that our small island development states have witnessed to the impacts, it has become one of the top agenda in the recent Pacific Island Leaders Forum that was recently held in Tonga for the Pacific leaders. And so, ladies and gentlemen, for Fiji, we comprise of about 330 odd islands in a span of 1.3 million square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean, right to our EZ. And as an island home, it consists of a very vulnerable ocean ecosystem where biodiversity and ecosystem goods and services is a critical part of sustaining life and economic well-being of our people. However, evidently, the challenge that is posed by climate change is very real for us. And this is witnessed by some of our low-lying islands that are impacted through saltwater intrusion, coastal degradation, and is also impacting in terms of impacting on our agriculture and sustainable source of livelihood. And this has basically put us in a position that we must act upon the impact that we're feeling right at our doorsteps. And for us, we've witnessed coastal erosion, saltwater intrusion into freshwater sources, increasing flooding. The effects are not just environmental, they're threatening also our food security, infrastructure, and our cultural and traditional way of life. For Fiji, ladies and gentlemen, we record a 6 millimeter, approximately 0.2 inch of increase in sea level per year, which is larger than the global average. And in 2021, Fiji was ranked among the top 15 countries with the highest disaster risk, a situation that we feel that will worsen through time. And so in terms of our infrastructural impact, most of our roads, bridges, airports, and wharves, it's built within near disaster-prone areas, low-lying areas, and so these are some of the fronting end of the impact of sea level rise and climate change, as well as the natural disasters. But we're happy to say that we've learned over the years, we're quite vocal too in this space, both globally, internationally, as well as regionally. And we've adopted a number of technological measures to help us build our resilience and build our adaptation measures to the impact of climate change and sea level rise. And we're also aware that about 75% of our population, around 600,000 plus, they reside along our coastal areas, that making them the most vulnerable to the impact of sea level rise. Not only that, we also have our, our sensitive ecological systems, our coral reef system, mangrove ecosystems. These are also ecosystems that are vulnerable to the change in global temperatures, and also the change in climate as well as sea level. In terms of our key messages that we would like to amplify to guide member states, we would like to be able to see, as a small island development state, as Fiji is the front line of climate change and sea level rise, and these challenges poses existential threats to our nation, affecting our economy and our communities. And for this, we identify the need for a comprehensive and well-organized data and sufficient technical and financial resources. So for us, ocean accounting may offer a potential solution that may also provide us an integrated framework for economic, social, and environmental data related to ocean, and also to include costs for climate change and sea level rise. Second of all, we see the importance of harnessing nature-based solutions as a solution to help us mitigate. And the beautiful thing about nature-based solution is it's a synergistic action that can address both biodiversity loss as well as mitigate the impacts of climate change. So Fiji, we have pioneered some of the nature-based solution concepts through our NBS seawalls structures with and government has partnered with communities, and we also have donor partners that supported us, and we've managed to protect a number of our coastal fronts from the dynamic wave actions that have basically eaten away a number of our, including it's encroached onto some of the land where the villages really are located, and for which we have to then opt for a number of relocation projects of our local communities. But one such pilot project that I'd like to mention specifically, and I'd like to acknowledge, which I'm learning today as well, is a project Halophyte, which is a 5-year project in Fiji to implement nature-based solution to scale across the Pacific. And it also includes the funding of the PhD students. And also we'd like to see a strengthened national framework and international cooperation around commitment around addressing both. And lastly, we would like to see a global call for scaled up of finance and partnership. Looking at the global community to also address some of the sentiments and some of the concerns that are raised by small island development states, especially areas of special circumstances. I'll end there.
Okay, thank you very much. That's both for the, just even hearing you talk about the vulnerabilities of your nation, it's sort of a different thing to hear it from you than to just to read it. So thank you for that, and being so specific about the sort of nature-based solutions and others that you're mentioning, so thank you for that. Let's now turn to Australia, a cornerstone for stability in the Asia-Pacific region. Your government has also introduced a new development strategy that emphasizes climate action. How do you see Australia's role here?
Thank you, Latif, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. It's exciting that this is one of the first topics for discussion in these 2 action days ahead of the Summit of the Future, which starts on Sunday. I should mention at the outset that member states are still negotiating the Pact of the Future, with only a couple of days to go until the summit starts. And climate change is a central issue that has yet to be agreed by member states. I think it's important that we realise that we're not entirely on the same page as a global community on this issue. There's still a way to go yet. But I'm very proud to be here. I'm proud that University of New South Wales is a co-host along with UN Global Pulse, which is a organisation that we've been very supportive of for more than a decade now. So to your question, Latif, about Australia's role in supporting local initiatives in the Pacific, I entirely agree with my colleague from Fiji, as you would know, that while climate change is a global threat, it is a threat that impacts small island states more than any other states. And we all have an obligation to do everything that we can to address climate change, as well as to address the impacts of climate change that are already upon us. We've hardwired climate change into Australia's international development policy. So from this financial year, half of Australia's investments, over $3 million, will have to have climate change or climate adaptation as a primary objective. By 2028, 80% of Australia's investments in foreign aid programs will have to have climate change as a central objective. We're also a strong supporter of the Pacific Resilience Facility, which is a Pacific-owned and led initiative for climate finance with a $100 million contribution. I should say that the objective of that facility is to mobilise $2 billion in climate financing for the Pacific, which gives you a sense of the size and scale of the challenge. We've also rejoined the Green Climate Fund. Some might be aware that Australia wasn't a founding member of the Green Climate Fund. We withdrew from it some years ago with the strong belief that it was no longer working for small island developing states and their specific challenges. We've worked with the Green Climate Fund to try and improve the mobilisation of finance for small island states, and we're now really proud to be a contributor to that fund, and we hope that it will be deployed to support small island states and their specific challenges. I think just in terms of what we think needs to be done now in order to amplify messages, the Pacific itself has identified a number of really novel solutions to climate change. One of them, which the government of Vanuatu used quite strategically, was seeking advisory opinions from ITLOS and the ICJ to help them to identify causes and responsibility for climate change. There's also initiatives to establish regional principles for complex and novel issues, preserving maritime zones and statehood in the face of sea level rise. And there's work to advocate for the International Law Commission to study the topic of sea level rise in relation to international law. Let me just, I know that you want me to give you back the floor, Latif, but let me just mention the Australia-Tuvalu-Falapelie Union Treaty, which recently came into force in Australia as law. This is the most significant treaty in nearly 50 years of Australia-Pacific relations. Two countries, Australia and Tuvalu, are working together to deliver on a vision for enhanced development cooperation, a mobility pathway and security cooperation. So the Union, it recognises that continuing statehood and sovereignty is essential, notwithstanding the impacts of climate change-related sea level rise. It's a legally binding treaty through which Australia commits to support Pacific Islanders who have nowhere to go in the face of climate impacts. A priority on both sides of this agreement is mobility with dignity. So ensuring that Pacific Islanders who are impacted by climate change have choice, have agency in their future despite climate impacts. So this is one example of an initiative that we hope others will emulate. It's something that we talk about a lot, the government of Tuvalu talks about a lot, so that we can share the lessons from this groundbreaking treaty, and we hope that others will follow our example. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm glad you took that extra time to say that, because it is so great to hear kind of what a priority this is. We don't have too much time, but Ayaka, I would like to go to you just to get a kind of a quick snapshot about what the UN is doing. The Secretary General made sea level rise a key priority. In fact, just last month visited Tonga. The Sea Level Rise Summit is next week. What in just as tight as you can, what is the UN doing? What can the UN do, especially to support member states?
Great. Thank you, Latif. And yes, we are almost there with the Summit of the Future, as the Australian ambassador said 2 days to go. And what issue is more defining challenges of our time than sea level rise? So yes, as you said, 25th of September, there will be a high-level meeting on the sea level rise. In fact, our senior managers discuss this preparation for this meeting, but also to really discuss how to tackle this enormous challenge, which is so multidimensional. I mean, hearing from these ministers and Australian ambassador, we understood there are existentialist challenge, legal, human rights, climate change. I mean, it's everything, right? So, I mean, it's clear to us that we really need a multidimensional approach to this as well. And I'm not going to get into that because the next segment of this event is on solutions. So my colleagues will get into specifics. But I just wanted to say, clearly, this is a challenge that the United Nations must confront, and we are tackling this. And we need new solutions, right? Nature-based solutions, but we need to combine the solutions with digital and data, leveraging new technologies. And here, I wanted to just briefly mention UN 2.0, which is Secretary General's transformative agenda. You may have seen banners. We have UN 2.0 all over our campus now. Data, digital, innovation, behavioral science, and strategic foresight. And Global Pulse, working with Global Pulse is one of my perks in this job, and it is a great platform to be able to operationalize these concepts into solutions and working together with our government partners and your UN partners, and you'll hear a little bit more about that shortly. So all of this to say, I'm very delighted that Global Pulse Asia Pacific Hub was launched last year in Jakarta. This was building on already 10 years of experience in Jakarta, and we're working very closely with the governments of Indonesia and Australia, and especially on this sea level rise challenge, we will be working and coming up with new solutions and working with governments across the Pacific. So I'm very much looking forward to this new chapter. So I know that we're in a negative time zone, so I'll finish here, but you'll hear more specifically about what solutions colleagues are working on in the next segment. Thank you.
That's right. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists for sharing their insights. Thank you all so much, and let's welcome our next guest, Colin Grant, to the stage. Test it? Okay. The gentleman on stage with me today is from an academic institution that has been on the forefront of studying the climate crisis in general and sea level rise in particular, the University of New South Wales in Australia. And from that university, we have here the Deputy Vice Chancellor Global, Colin Grant. Professor Grant, thank you for being here. Let's start with a simple question, which is what is the university doing in response to this crisis?
Thank you very much, Latif. Delighted to be here in this very special setting with so many makers and doers and thinkers. So thank you very much for the invitation. I think the short answer to your question is we're doing a lot and not enough. So we're doing a lot in the space of waste recycling, green hydrogen. We're doing a lot in the space of membranes and purification. I'd like to mention perhaps two initiatives in particular, Project Halophyte, already referenced by the Minister from Fiji, and the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership. So Project Halophyte, and Prof. Danzi will say more and more meaningfully in just a second as our technical senior lead on this, really anchors the partnership ethos with the government of Fiji and the University of South Pacific, and anchors that scientific input with local knowledge to drive solutions for high saline environments, notably through coastal remediation, mangrove replanting, including floating mangroves. And if you're lucky, Prof. Danzi might say more about that in a moment. And also the blue carbon as a potential source of income. So that's one example, a specific example beyond all the others. The other, and Ms. Popino will say more about this in a second, Global Ocean Accounts Partnership. 14 member states and intergovernmental organizations already invested in this program. We need to see more investment of a different type. There's an event coming up, I think, with 50 member states involved in this work to scale that multilateral nature-based approach to problem solving. What does it involve? Ocean accounts really bundle environmental, economic, social information to enable measurement of progress towards sustainable development of the ocean. So these are about 7 examples of the work we're doing as a university. When I said, I hope suitably self-critically, not enough, I think scale, which we've heard the appeal for greater scale in the course of the event so far, we recognize that partnership is critical. Partnership with governments, partnerships with the UN Global Pulse, a shout out for that wonderful partnership we have with you, Ahmed, thank you. But also local communities, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, where so much capacity resides. So we're absolutely ready for that greater drive, greater scale, greater partnership with you.
Well, and partnership is kind of a good segue to the next question I had, which is that, I mean, this whole event is a partnership. Clearly, there's so many organizations, institutions, people that you're doing partnerships with. How do you see these partnerships like making a real change in lives and livelihoods sort of on the ground?
I think in many different ways. So one idea we've already spoken about this morning is ensuring that there's an appropriate circulation of talent. There's a lot of it in all of our communities. And to get that talent, particularly undergraduate students, into positions where they acquire early stage knowledge of the power of research, data integrity to drive solutions. So that's one area. I think mobility of people between, in our case, Australia and vulnerable island communities is also vital. Prof. Danzi and Ms. Poppin will say more about that. So actually walking with local communities, walking with local governments, NGOs, and other actors to drive those solutions. So these are some examples. It's not, so science is absolutely vital, but we recognize that we have many areas in the university, I've referenced some, where we have strongly policy-facing solutions or partnership solutions for local partners in the region. So some training and engagement also in country or in Canberra.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And we're about to hear from some of your colleagues as well. So we've heard now from countries about the magnitude of this issue. We've heard from the UN, a little bit from academia. But let's now focus in on solutions. We have picked some examples from the Asia-Pacific region that we find promising, that we find encouraging, and we're going to bring up folks to talk about them. These are by no means the only examples. This session as a whole is meant to be not an exhaustive list, but a conversation starter, an opening for more. So let's now invite to the stage our second panel. Thank you so much, Colin. Okay, great. I'll invite you up one at a time. So first we have Dr. Andrew Danzi, the academic lead for humanitarian engineering at the University of New South Wales. Dr. Danzi also co-leads the, which its reputation precedes it, obviously, because we've heard it, about it twice already, Project Halophyte. I guess, yeah, well, why don't I introduce everybody first? Angelique Pouponneau, who has a very long title, Senior Strategist for International Cooperation, Global Ocean Accounts Partnership, Secretariat, and Center for Sustainable Development Reform at University of New South Wales. Next we have Arti Holamaini, Yeah, please join us. Director of the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs. And then we'll also have Ahmed Al-Said, Regional Head of UN Global Pulse Asia Pacific. So Dr. Danzy, I'll start with you. What is Project Halophyte and how does it support coastal communities?
Thank you very much, Latif. Yeah. So we've been in a climate crisis since the 70s, and we have tremendous trajectories if we want to make a difference. Project Halophyte is a project that brings research to applied problems. It's a project that we are doing in partnership with the University of the South Pacific and that I co-lead with Professor Will Glaymore. It's a 5-year project, generously supported by Swire Shipping. It's a 5-year, multi-million-dollar, multi-beneficiary project, and it's looking at doing two things. One is large-scale environmental restoration of mangroves. Halophyte, it means salt-loving, so salt-loving plants, so large-scale coastal restoration of mangroves, as well as integrating mangroves into coastal infrastructure through floating islands or floating pontoons and greenifying biodiverse deserts in places like ports and other areas like that.
Interesting. And how long has this project been going on?
So it's a 5-year project that started in March, and we're really excited because it supports the high ambition of the Pacific. We're really proud to be working with the Fijian government as a pilot project to then scale across the Pacific and support that regional leadership if we are going to address climate change and rising sea levels and stay as close as we can to 1.5 degrees warming. I'm really hoping that Fiji and the other high ambition coalition countries are really giving them, in those negotiations to get as much as we can out of these last few days.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. Angelique, if I can go to you, a similar question for you. What is the Global Oceans Account Partnership and how does it help?
Thank you very much. And I know it's, to many people, it'd be like, it's another term, another thing we need to think about. But I always think it's really a useful way to maybe put things into context as a useful way to think about things. So just to give you some background on myself, my name is Angelique Pouponneau, and not from the Asia Pacific. I'm from Seychelles, but with UNSW, of course. And we're 100,000 people who is responsible for 1.35 million kilometers square of ocean, right? And we're currently, as many of you know, living through this state of constant change, warming seas, ocean acidification, sea level rise, and quite frankly, about 80% of our critical infrastructure, airports, schools, homes, hotels, are along the coast. So we really need tools to manage this uncertainty, frameworks, data. And as we say very often, or as an old age saying, we cannot manage what we cannot measure. So ocean accounts, and it's been referenced already by our colleague from Fiji, is an opportunity to integrate, organize social, economic, and environmental data related to ocean in a common framework. And this presents a useful opportunity to be able to have transparent, comparable data across sectors, but also across jurisdictions, and also through time. So it may sound a little bit like more data, more statistics, but it really is an opportunity to track changes not only in wealth of our ocean, but also the income and well-being of our people and the economic production that is tied to our waters and how it's changing over time. I want to take this really even more practically by turning to the sort of challenge that was given to us by the Deputy Minister of Indonesia when he talked about the need to access finance and climate finance and being able to make that case to the loss and damage, the fund that responds to loss and damage, I should say. And here, there's going to be a huge need for data. And as we know, with many times when we make these applications to the global funds, there's a need to have data. There's a need to show how things have changed. There's a need to have this causation piece. But we've heard already the impacts are multidimensional. The data can not only be about ocean change. It needs to be about how it's affecting people, income, well-being. And really, the Ocean Accounts Framework provides guidance for us to be able to see all of this in an integrated fashion so that governments, different sectors can really take informed, evidence-based decisions. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much. And you don't expect to be talking about finance on a, like I expected to be talking about mangroves, no offense, but I didn't expect to be talking about finance, but I think it's clearly so critical. Another thing I didn't expect to talk about, let's talk about the Office for Outer Space Affairs. You have a completely different perspective on this from outer space. What innovative solutions do you see, can you identify from your perspective that you think can help address this issue?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And indeed, many people have not heard of UNUSA, the Office for Outer Space Affairs. Even though we have a outer space perspective, we actually have a very local insight, and I would love to share that with you. But first of all, perhaps many of you know that the only way to effectively monitor sea level rise from melting and disintegrating ice caps and glaciers, including in mountains, on a continual basis, on a daily basis, is via satellite. There's a lot of investment going into new satellites, even dedicated SWOT satellites, which stands for Surface, Water, and Ocean Topography, I think. And these satellites are providing high-resolution data, which enable us to really see what's going on with the oceans and also terrestrial surface water, like lakes and rivers and so on, which is increasingly relevant. We see ourselves very much as the Secretary General's custodians of space for the Sustainable Development Goals, while we also work on space sustainability and governance, of course. And in that capacity, even though we're the UN office, we work very locally, very nationally. We do dedicated technical advisory missions with individual countries, looking at their particular situation and working with them to make sure they know how to trigger, for example, the International Charter on Disasters, but more importantly, giving them the data they need and teaching them how to use it so that they can act locally. The overwhelming feedback, we have 700 recommendations from the different missions that we've done, but the overwhelming feedback is that there is a data divide, that countries really need high-resolution imagery in order to take action themselves. There's a lot of free imagery available, Copernicus, Landsat, Seabirds, China, Brazil, so on, but high-resolution imagery is either commercial, which means it's expensive, or it's military, which means it's not accessible. And so that's an issue, and that's why our prime focus is to really unlock that access and affordability to actionable satellite data, which should be high resolution.
How do you do that?
Well, to start with, we're looking at the UN system. Believe it or not, there's over 25 entities within the UN system who are each purchasing satellite imagery themselves on a single license basis, which I don't think you need to be a private sector person like I was to realize that there's some inefficiency in that. There's a lot of redundancy in that. There's got to be a way to optimize that. So we're looking at that. But when you have access to high resolution data, you can create really accurate digital elevation models, and you can use that to produce digital twins. So these are these fashionable words that we hear, but that, if you imagine, that is a digital 3D image of a country or the world or whatever, and you can simulate what happens if sea rises by 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters. You can really see the impact of where that will go and what that will affect. And the challenge for us is, while there's a lot of investment going into the satellites themselves, and there's a lot of space agencies and people who will tell you, oh, there's lots of data available for free, but it's to make sure that we put that data in the hands of the countries who need it. There is a lot of local experts, and we need to empower them to continuously monitor, build expertise, and provide foresight to their own governments. And just one closing point, which is we realize in our missions that there are many national disaster management agencies, many governments who don't even know the potential of what this data can do for them. And for that, that's where we need to zoom out from our local work and work with Global Pulse and others at the higher level to raise that broad awareness. Thank you for having me with you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Ahmed Al-Said, UN Global Pulse is the Secretary General's Innovation Lab. You've recently launched and work at the Asia Pacific Hub in Jakarta. what are you all doing about rising sea levels? What have you been able to do about that issue so far?
Thank you very much, Latif, and thank you to colleagues and distinguished honorable guests who are with us today. I think the issue is quite, as mentioned before, significant, and it does require an approach that includes multi-stakeholder partnerships. It is an issue that we have started working on earlier this year following the launch of the Asia-Pacific Hub of Global Pulse with support from the Government of Indonesia and Government of Australia. It has been identified as a key thematic area where we can really see the value of bringing data AI capabilities in the service of informing policy planning and decision making. It's an issue that at first glance you do not realize the complexities of. And then you will see on the screen a video demo of the initial solution that we've developed and co-created with our colleagues in the government of Indonesia. It's an issue that the deeper that you learn about the impact of, especially in a country like Indonesia, the largest archipelagic country in the world, coastal areas remain vulnerable. However, there is a lot of work that the government is also doing in response. And our task here was, how can we utilize global data sets and create a platform that also enables bringing additional layers of data that is locally collected to create and generate the right types of insights. So the significant efforts that the government of Indonesia is putting forward to respond to this issue can be better targeted. Now, doing this together with colleagues in the government has been very insightful. I would call this a journey of development. If we want to achieve scale, we all know that with these types of innovative solutions, we need to make sure that we are co-creating with the right owners who are going to sustain those solutions. We also need to create the right ecosystem. So what was mentioned earlier today about the importance of partnerships is very, very important. Scaling is a multiplayer game. We cannot do this alone. The government can do their best with the resources they have, but then also having private sector partnerships, having UN partnerships and others is quite critical for this moving forward. The solution that was developed, this is just a snapshot that shows you what would happen in different scenarios of rising sea level. We're putting meteor scenarios because also there are other elements there that affect the coastal areas. You will see that additional data layers are added there related to food security, related to agriculture, related to population density. And then similar regions across Indonesia are clustered through that solution. So when designing an intervention, you can actually replicate that intervention in similar regions, seems like in an easy way. So it would not, so we would try and reduce kind of resource waste as well. So this is just a model. And once we've started working on this, also there has been a lot of interest from within the government of Indonesia and also other governments in the region to try and see how can this be replicated potentially. The idea here is that for scaling this, we need to really identify what parts of this can be easily replicable and what other parts needs to be contextualized, and that's very important for scaling the model. And working together with the UN system and also colleagues from the governments, we are really looking forward to taking this also specifically in the Pacific where the needs are, guided by the needs. So this is also very essential. Doing our homework on what works and what is needed is very critical for moving forward with this solution. I wanted to also recognize that since partnerships are kind of the key driver for this work, and also a partnership have brought us here together alongside our colleagues from UNSW, who we really appreciate for all the support. I want to also recognize DCO Regional Office based out of Bangkok for bringing us together. I think that brokering as well has been very important and was central for this to come to fruition, and we look forward to working with other UN entities and colleagues in the next phase to look at this issue at scale. Thank you.
Yeah, good luck with that model. That's great. So let's just thank this panel so much for sharing their work with us. Don't go anywhere though. I do want to open it up to questions and answers from the audience for this panel or for prior panel members who are still here. Yeah, so raise your hand. Someone will come around to you with a mic. Oh, yeah. We have someone in the front row here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Perhaps as an introduction, I'm Francesca from the Mission of Malta, and thank you for this panel and for the previous panel. It's a pleasure to see Sea Level Rise really taking center stage ahead of the Summit of the Future, but also, may I recall, there's also the high-level plenary on Sea Level Rise, which is taking place this Wednesday, so certainly this conversation is very timely. From my side, also as an island state, perhaps not a developing state, but still a small island state, we do share an affinity with these challenges. So my question to our distinguished panel speakers is, oftentimes sea level rise has both gradual and sudden implications. And when accessing data, this should be definitely taken into account. Oftentimes when it's gradual, we have the luxury of time, of mapping, information, data, etc. But what about when it's a sudden impact? When there's the big event and sometimes that same critical infrastructure that is utilized to access that data is also depleted. So really and truly, how can we reconcile these extensive ways of getting solutions and operationalizing them? And really, how do you reconcile this, especially when it's a sudden impact from a sea level rise event, you know, and how we can also build resilience at the same time to ensure that, you know, capacity is also retained for potential future events. Thank you so much.
Terrific question. Does anyone want to? Yeah, go for it.
Your question is really good. You highlight the fact that when this persistent threat becomes a disaster, almost, and you will have infrastructure wiped out, also telecommunications infrastructure, not only the data mapping abilities and so on. I don't know if we have done a technical assistance mission with Malta, but if we haven't, we should. Because what we do is we try to train people within your government to know how to trigger the Charter on Disasters. There's also a Crisis Communications Charter, which the satellite operator community signed with the World Food Programme a couple of years ago, which you can trigger to have access to immediate satellite communications. And what happens both with satellite imagery and communications with both of those charters is that the international community rallies to make sure that within 24 to 48 hours you do have access to those solutions. So that's something to be aware of, and if you don't know about it, then we'll be happy to tell you more.
Any other questions? Oh, we got one more right here in the front row as well.
Thank you. Thank you for the two panels and excellent panelists. My name is Aki Enkeberg from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. I wanted to ask about the how would I put it? Maybe the aspects around managing this kind of societal transition that is forthcoming, and maybe also related to the responsibility angle, responsibility to act, and managing this transition at the community level. So through better data, through better forecasts, etc., things become visible. This information will have real life impact in terms of how communities see themselves in this process in the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, and so on. People start seeing that the land around them might not be there in 50 years. Things will become uninsurable. Property will become worthless. Agriculture will become impossible, etc. So this is not a theoretical exercise anymore. We're creating something that will have real-life impact on people's livelihoods and how they see their future. And this will put pressure on the governments to act, because people will demand that in a way, being in that position. So how do you create tools to manage that process, which is very much sort of political and societal instead of a technical exercise? Thanks.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, go for it. You can just talk.
Thank you for that very good question. That's something that we've grappled with through the design of Project Halophyte, as well as that. How do we make large-scale meaningful change? And if we're moving towards a decarbonised world and our 2050 goals for net zero, how do we make sure that progress towards those carbon goals does not overshadow or counteract even goals that are related to SDG or humanitarian targets? How do we make sure that the people have access to water, to food, to energy, and others like that? And what we've been doing, because traditional knowledge and traditional landowners should be the beneficiaries of any kind of carbon credits or biodiversity credits or those kind of things, that one of the paths we may go down, it should be empowering those local landholders and building on that local knowledge and that local ownership, and not be a somewhere out of sight and out of mind, or over eucalyptus that doesn't do anything for anyone. And we're developing this project in partnership with local communities in Fiji to make sure that we're building on their needs and their desires. And part of the resilience that was raised before in a question is also to provide a diversification of incomes for some people in coastal communities, especially where you have massive environmental change. And without a really sustainable environmental base, we cannot effectively address societal or economic related SDGs. So it's making sure that we have a sustainable environment and then focusing on the societal and economic as well. Because you're right, we need to make sure we take everyone along with us to do that. And that's why it's so important that we have UN Global Pulse and the innovation that they bring as well, and the research of universities and academia to make sure that we are hastening that transition and moving those trajectories in a much faster way, because we're not on track at the moment. So it is quite scary.
If I can just respond on that, I think it's one thing to have the data, but then what? I suppose is really the foundation of your question. And I think it's really thinking about how we then use that data, whether it is by policymakers, whether it is by communities. And that process needs to be consultative. So the other tools that are available to us are, of course, policy. We are going to, as governments, will have to start thinking about setback policies, right? As I mentioned, I'm from the Seychelles. There are demarcation poles of land that is now in the water. However, setback policy means that you're setting back into somebody else's property because there isn't that much land to begin with. So thinking about policies. And it's both at a national, regional, and an international level. Because there's what you can do within the land that you have on a national basis, but this is ultimately it's going to become it is an international problem. And the tools, the frameworks that we have, I think we're in the right building to start thinking about what that looks like. And I think somebody already mentioned it, the importance of human rights in that entire process. One of the things that I often like to think about is, what would happen to my country, even if we have the data. And one of the things that's very intriguing is around what I call the threat of integration, right? So even if you are a climate-induced displaced person, where you go next and how those rights are respected, I think is something that we all have to grapple with. And to the point of our colleague from Malta, this is almost to her point about constant versus sudden. And I think we are still at a place, relatively so. Of course, the problem is different across the world, but the fire isn't at the door yet. And I think this is an opportunity for us to really be at a place where we can use the data, think about the tools that we do have to address the challenge, before we all go into panic mode, where we all know how decisions are made domestically and internationally at panic mode. It's not always the best outcome for everyone. Thanks.
I think that's all the time we have for questions. I'll just say my impressions here. I just have been sort of Ayaka's words from earlier are sort of echoing in my head that this is one of the defining problems of this moment on Earth, and also kind of hearing everybody else's, the chorus of everybody else's voice, that it's not one problem. This is so many problems. This is a universe of problems, and we need so many different kinds of expertise here, from data science to satellite engineering, to all different kinds of things that that maybe you wouldn't even expect. And for that reason, and it seems like, I'm sure it's sort of my first day here, and it seems like it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, that this is, this is the kind of problem you need to address in partnership. There's no one hero who's going to save the day here. There's no one country who's alone. No single institution could possibly solve this problem. This is a problem for global solidarity, and it seems like we're sort of, that's already happening. There are countries, the UN, academia, all kinds of different actors coming together to address this issue, and that's how it needs to be. So that's it for today. Next week, there's a high-level summit on this very issue, as you have heard. As we said earlier, that this panel is meant to be an opening. There's plenty more space for member states to get involved, even if you're not from a member state, no matter where you are from, what country, what institution, whatever sector. This is an all-hands kind of a problem. So please join us, and thank you very, very much.